"She counts on her fingers," the Duke of Ashworth said, and laughed and went back to his port. He did not think of it again for 6 weeks. By Michaelmas, those fingers had reconciled 3 years of arrears in the Ashworth estate accounts, recovered £412 in miscalculated tenant rents, and produced a ledger so clean that his own solicitor asked who had done it and then sat down when told. The Duke did not know what to make of this. He had been certain, in the particular way of men who are certain about things they have not examined, that she was decorative and provincial and slightly dull. He was not often wrong about people. That was the problem. Thornfield, Derbyshire, the 3rd week of July, 1818. The house had received visitors for 200 years with the indifference of a thing that has seen too many arrivals to be impressed. Its stone face was pale and regular, its windows set at intervals that suggested order rather than welcome, and its gravel drive, which had been raked that morning at 6, already showed the mark of a single boot where the undergardener had cut across it. The house did not remark on this. The house did not remark on anything. Miss Cecily Vane arrived on the Wednesday coach with one trunk, a leather document case worn soft at the corners, and the air of a person reporting for work rather than beginning an adventure. She was 26. She had been employed as a secretary and household accountant to the late Countess of Ashworth, the Duke's maternal aunt, for 4 years, and she had been summoned to Thornfield by letter on the grounds that the Countess's death had left the estate's books in a condition that the Duke's London solicitor described in writing as alarming. The letter had not said alarming. It had said in need of attention. Cecily had read it 3 times and concluded that alarming was the more accurate word. She was met at the door by Mrs. Potts, the housekeeper, who was 61 and had the composure of someone who has already decided everything that needs deciding and is simply waiting for the rest of the world to arrive at the same conclusions. Mrs. Potts looked at the document case, looked at Cecily's face and said, "You'll want the East study. It has the better light and the ledgers are already there." "Thank you," Cecily said. "The Duke is in residence," Mrs. Potts added, in the tone of someone noting weather. "I was told he might be." "He was not told much about you," Mrs. Potts said, which was not quite a warning and was not quite not one, and led the way up the main stairs without further elaboration. The East study was a room of perhaps 20 feet by 16, with 2 tall windows overlooking the south lawn, and a table that had been used at various points in its life for correspondence, for maps, for the pressing of botanical specimens, and most recently for the stacking of account books in an order that could charitably be described as chronological. The smell was of old paper and lamp oil, and faintly of the lavender sachets the late Countess had favoured. 3 of the sachets were still tucked between ledger volumes. Cecily removed them and set them on the windowsill and opened the first ledger and began. She had been working for 40 minutes when the door opened. The man who appeared in the doorway was tall, controlled in his movements with the particular economy of someone who has never needed to make himself smaller for a room, and dressed for riding in clothes that had been expensive long enough ago that they now looked merely well made. He was 34. His expression was, as Cecily would later describe it to herself, held rather than set, the distinction being that a set expression has been arranged, while a held expression is actively resisting something. He looked at her. He looked at the ledgers. He looked at her again. "You are Miss Vane," he said. "Yes." "I was told my aunt's secretary would be coming." "That is what I am." A pause of perhaps 4 seconds, which was long enough to be a pause and short enough to deny it. "I expected someone older," he said. "I am 26, Cecily said, in the manner of a person reporting a fact, which is not, I think, a disqualification. The Duke of Ashworth looked at her with the expression of a man who has said something he did not intend to say aloud and is now determining whether to acknowledge this. He determined not to. "The solicitor's letter mentioned arrears," he said. 3 years of them, possibly 4. I will know more by Friday." "Friday," he repeated. "If the ledgers are complete, are there others elsewhere in the house?" He did not know. He said, with the frankness of a man not accustomed to not knowing things about his own property, that there might be in the library. "I will look this evening," Cecily said, and turned back to the ledger. The Duke remained in the doorway for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, in the manner of a person who has been dismissed and is deciding whether to accept it, and then left. Mrs. Potts, who had been passing the corridor with a set of linens and had therefore heard the entirety of this exchange through the door that Cecily had left precisely 6 inches ajar, allowed herself the smallest possible compression of satisfaction and continued on her way. The 4th day. The library. Cecily found the additional ledgers on the evening of the first day, shelved between a volume of sermons and a county agricultural survey of 1809, which was either an accident of reshelving or a statement about the late estate manager's opinion of his own work. She brought them to the east study and added them to the table and did not sleep particularly well, which was not unusual when she was at the beginning of a large set of accounts, because the numbers had a way of continuing to arrange themselves behind her eyes in the dark. By the 4th day, she had established the following: that the arrears were not the result of fraud, but of a system of record-keeping that had been designed by someone who understood the theory of double-entry bookkeeping and had then applied it with an optimism that outpaced their arithmetic. That £412, 8 shillings and 3 pence had been miscalculated across 37 tenant accounts over the course of 3 rental years, and that the late estate manager, a Mr. Hadlow, had been a man of genuine conscientiousness and genuine innumeracy, which was a combination that produced, over time, a particular kind of chaos. She was explaining this to the Duke's solicitor, a Mr. Fenn, who had come down from London specifically to receive an explanation, when the Duke appeared in the doorway of the east study again. Mr. Fenn was 60, had been in practice for 35 years, and was not a man given to visible surprise. He was visibly surprised. He had a notebook open and was writing in it with the application of a student, and he looked up at the Duke with the expression of a man who has been interrupted during a lecture he is finding unexpectedly useful. 412, Mr. Fenn said. And 3 pence. And 3 pence, Cecily confirmed. The 3 pence is from a single miscounted bushel in the Harrow Farm account in 1815. I have left it in because removing it would require reissuing the receipt, and the tenant has since died. Leave it in, Mr. Fenn said. I had planned to. The Duke from the doorway said nothing. He was watching Cecily with the expression of a man who has come to a room expecting to find it empty and found it instead in the middle of something he did not know was happening. Mr. Fenn turned, registered his employer's presence, and said, "She has found everything, Your Grace. I am not certain I could have found it." "You could not," Cecily said, not unkindly, "because you were looking for fraud. There is no fraud. There is only Mr. Hadlow's optimism about subtraction." Mr. Fenn made a sound that was, in a man of his restraint, the equivalent of a laugh. The Duke said, "When will the corrected accounts be ready?" "By Michaelmas," Cecily said. "The 17th at the latest. The 23rd if the Harrow Farm records require the secondary ledger." "The 17th, the Duke said. "That is what I said." He left. Mr. Fenn watched him go and then turned back to Cecily with the frank assessment of someone who has decided the room is safe. "He is not accustomed," Mr. Fenn said carefully, "to being given a completion date." "He should be," Cecily said. "It is a reasonable thing to want." Mr. Fenn wrote something in his notebook, which may or may not have been related to the accounts. The 14th of August. The evening was warm enough that the east study windows had been left open, and the smell of cut grass came in from the south lawn where the gardeners had been working since 4. Cecily was reconciling the Harrow Farm secondary ledger, which had proved necessary after all, and had been at the table since 7 in the morning, with a break of 30 minutes at noon for bread and a cup of tea that had gone cold before she remembered to drink it. She was therefore not in a mood to be interrupted, and registered the Duke's arrival in the doorway with the particular quality of attention of someone who has noted an interruption and chosen not to address it yet. He came in, which he had not done before. He sat in the chair on the far side of the table, which was the chair that had been used by Mr. Fenn on his visit, and which still had on its seat the impression of a man who sat with his weight forward. He did not say anything immediately. Cecily continued with the ledger. "My aunt spoke of you," he said after a time. "She was kind. She said you had made order of her household accounts in 6 months. 4, Cecily said. The first 2 were spent understanding the system her previous secretary had used, which was idiosyncratic. She said you were indispensable. Cecily looked up from the ledger at this, with the composure of someone who has been given a piece of information and is deciding what to do with it. She was generous, she said. She was not, as a rule, generous with that word, the Duke said. She used it precisely. A silence. The grass smell came in through the window. Somewhere on the south lawn, one of the gardeners was talking to another in a low voice about something that had nothing to do with grass. "Your aunt," Cecily said, "was the best employer I have had. She told me what she needed, she left me to do it, and she paid me what the work was worth." She paused. "Those are rarer conditions than they should be." The Duke looked at her with the expression of a man hearing a sentence that contains more than one thing and trying to determine which thing he is expected to respond to. "Yes," he said, which was not the response she had expected, and which was, she thought, the most honest thing he had said to her. He looked at the ledger. "May I?" She turned it to face him. He studied it for a moment, with the attention of a man reading a map of territory he has not visited, and then turned it back. "The 17th, he said. "The 17th, she agreed. He left the chair without ceremony and went, and Cecily sat for a moment with the ledger open in front of her and the grass smell coming in, and then went back to the Harrow Farm accounts, because the Harrow Farm accounts were not going to reconcile themselves, and the 17th was in 3 days. The 17th of September, 1818, Michaelmas. She finished at 9:30 in the morning and brought the completed ledgers to the Duke's study, which was on the ground floor at the north end of the house, and smelled of wood smoke and the particular dry leather of books that are used rather than displayed. The Duke was at his desk with correspondence. He looked up when she came in. She set the ledgers on the desk with the efficiency of a person delivering a completed piece of work, which is what she was doing. "The 17th, he said, "as I said." He opened the top ledger. He turned to the summary page at the front, which Cecily had written in her own hand, with the corrected totals and the methodology for each correction set out in 3 columns, and read it with the thoroughness of a man who does not sign things he has not read. He turned several pages. He went back to the summary. "This is clear," he said. "It is meant to be. Mr. Hadlow's version was not clear." "Mr. Hadlow was a conscientious man," Cecily said, with the tact of someone who has decided that the dead deserve a particular kind of accuracy. "He was not a systematic one." The Duke closed the ledger. He set his hand flat on the cover, briefly, in the manner of a person concluding something. Then he said, "I would like you to stay." Cecily said, "In what capacity?" "The same one. Secretary, accountant, the estate accounts going forward, and the correspondence that requires—" He paused, searching for the word, "precision." "I see," she said. "It is a permanent position. The terms would be whatever my aunt paid you, or better if you require it." "I do not require it," she said. "Your aunt's terms were fair." She looked at the ledger under his hand. "I will stay until the end of the year, and we will see whether the arrangement suits." The Duke looked at her with the expression of a man who has offered a thing and received a counteroffer, and is deciding whether to be affronted or interested. He was, she thought, interested. "Until the end of the year," he said. "Yes." "And then?" "And then we will see," Cecily said, and left him with the ledgers. October, the East Study, the first frost on the south lawn. The arrangement had a shape to it within a fortnight. Cecily worked in the East Study from 7 until 2, at which point she brought anything requiring the Duke's signature or instruction to his study at the north end of the house, and he reviewed it and signed it and occasionally asked a question that was, she noted, increasingly precise. He was learning the accounts, which he had not expected. Most men in his position regarded the accounts as a system that produced conclusions and concerned themselves only with the conclusions. The Duke concerned himself with the method, and asked about it in the manner of a man who considers ignorance a temporary condition to be corrected rather than a permanent state to be managed. She found this, against her expectations, genuinely interesting. The questions he asked were not the questions of a man performing attention. They were the questions of a man who had been absent from a thing. She did not yet know what thing, and was now attempting to understand it from the inside. He asked about the tenant rotation system. He asked about the timber valuation method. He asked on one occasion why the household wine account was kept separately from the cellar inventory, and she explained that they were two different systems measuring two different things. The account measured expenditure, the inventory measured stock, and the relationship between them was the information. And he sat with this for a moment and then said, "No one has explained that before," in a tone that was not quite complaint and was not quite wonder. "It is a simple distinction," she said. "Most simple distinctions are not explained," he said, "because the people who understand them assume everyone does." This was accurate enough that she did not argue with it. The room had settled into a working order. The ledgers had a place. The correspondence had a place. The document case, which Cecily brought to the East Study each morning and returned to her room each evening, had a place at the left end of the table. On the third shelf of the bookcase, between a gazetteer of Derbyshire and a volume of agricultural essays, there was a book of botanical drawings that had belonged to the late Countess, and that Cecily had found in the stack of ledgers on the first day and shelved carefully, because it was not a ledger and did not belong with them. She had looked through it once. The drawings were meticulous. Several of them had notes in the margins in a hand that was not the Countess's. She had not asked about the notes. One morning in the third week of October she arrived to find the Duke already in the East Study, standing at the bookcase with the botanical volume open in his hands. He looked up when she came in with the particular expression of a man who has been caught at something and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. "This was my mother's," he said. "I thought the annotations might be," Cecily said, setting down the document case. He looked at the page in his hands. She studied botany seriously, more seriously than was considered. He stopped. He started again. She would have preferred to have studied it at an institution. That was not possible. "No," Cecily said, "it would not have been." He closed the book and held it for a moment and then put it back on the shelf with a care that was, she thought, the whole of what he was not saying, and turned to the correspondence. They worked in the same room for 3 hours that morning without speaking except about the accounts, and Cecily did not look at the shelf, and neither did he, and the frost on the south lawn melted by 11, and the light through the windows became the particular clear October light that has no warmth in it, but is very precise. The 29th of October. The problem arrived in the form of a letter from Cecily's younger brother, Thomas, who was 19 and a student at a college in Oxford that was considerably better than his finances, and who had, with the particular genius of young men in that position, managed to contract a debt of £60 to a fellow student of notably worse character and notably better connections, a Mr. Rafe Aldous, who had been patient about the debt for 3 months and was now, by his own account, being patient no longer. Thomas's letter was 3 pages and contained, in order, an explanation, an apology, a second explanation that contradicted the first, a request, and a postscript that said he was well otherwise and hoped she was the same. Cecily read it twice, folded it, and sat with it for a moment with the composure of someone who has already decided what to do and is simply allowing herself the brief inconvenience of feeling something about it first. £60 was 2 months of her salary. It was manageable. What was not manageable was the timeline. Aldous wanted the debt settled within a fortnight, and Cecily's quarterly payment was not due for 6 weeks. She went to the Duke's study at the usual time with the correspondence and the week's accounts, and set them on his desk and said, when he had reviewed the first 2 items, "I have a personal matter to raise." He looked up with the attention of a man who has learned to hear the difference between a personal matter and a professional one, and waited. She explained the situation with the economy of a person who has decided that clarity is more useful than pride. Thomas, Oxford, £60, a fortnight. She said she would require an advance on her quarterly payment and would understand if the terms of the advance included a deduction of interest, and she named the figure she considered a fair rate. The Duke listened with the expression of a man receiving information and not yet responding to it. When she finished, he said, "Who is Aldous?" "A fellow student. He is not a villain," she added, with the particular precision of someone who has considered this and wants the record to reflect it. He is a young man with poor finances and a creditor of his own. It would have been simpler if he were a villain. It usually would be, the Duke said, which was, she thought, the first genuinely dry thing he had said to her. The advance, she said. There is no need for interest, he said. There is every need, she said. I would prefer the terms to be formal. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been corrected on something he was not expecting to be corrected on and is revising his opinion of the correction. The terms will be formal, he said. No interest. That is the term. She considered this. Very well, she said. He wrote the draft himself, there and then, and handed it to her across the desk. Their fingers did not touch. The paper was warm from his hand. Your brother, he said as she was leaving, is he otherwise well? He says so, Cecily said. I take that to mean he is well enough. She sent the draft to Thomas that afternoon with a letter that was shorter than his and contained no second explanation. The first week of November, the East Study, late afternoon. It had been raining for 4 days without particular intensity or particular cessation, the kind of rain that is less a weather event than a general condition of the air, and the south lawn had gone from frost pale to the deep saturated green of ground that has had more than it needs. The light in the East Study was the grey amber of a lamp burning against a grey window, and Cecily had been working since 7, and it was now 4:30, and she had, without noticing, been working for 9.5 hours. The Duke came in at the usual time for the afternoon review, and sat across from her, and they went through the week's correspondence and the tenant renewal schedule for the spring quarter, and a question about the timber valuation that he had been thinking about for 2 weeks, and had finally formulated precisely enough to ask. She answered it. He wrote the answer in the margin of the relevant document in his own hand, which she had not seen him do before, and which produced in her a small and involuntary satisfaction that she did not examine. They were going through the last item, a letter from a neighbouring landowner about a shared drainage question, when the Duke said, without looking up from the letter, You have been here since 7. I am usually here since 7. It is 4:30. I am aware. He looked up. He had the expression of a man who has noticed something and is deciding whether to say so, which was, she had come to understand, the expression he wore most often, and which was different from his public expression, which was the expression of a man who has already decided everything. The drainage question can wait until tomorrow, he said. It can, she agreed, but I would rather finish it. Why? Because it will take 11 minutes, and then it will be done, and if I leave it I will think about it this evening. He looked at her with something that was not quite amusement, and was not quite recognition, and was, she thought, somewhere between the two. 11 minutes, he said, approximately. It took 9. She closed the document case and stood, and he stood also, which was not something he always did, and she noticed that he did it and said nothing about it, and he said nothing about it, and she took the document case and went to her room and sat by the window with the rain on the glass and thought about the drainage question for approximately 30 seconds before concluding that it was, in fact, resolved. The 17th of November. There was a dinner. The Duke had guests, a Mr. and Mrs. Cavendish of the neighbouring estate, a Colonel Hartley, who was an old friend of the Duke's, and a Miss Hartley, who was the Colonel's daughter, and who was 22 and very pretty, and who sat at the Duke's right hand and spoke with the ease of a person who has been placed at the right hand of important men before and found it unremarkable. Cecily was not at the dinner. She was in the East Study with a lamp and the spring quarter tenant renewals, which she had decided to begin drafting because the drainage question being resolved had freed up a section of the schedule she had expected to need. She heard the dinner from the East Study, which was close enough to the dining room to hear the rise and fall of voices without hearing words, and the particular sound of a table at which people are comfortable. She did not think about this. She worked until 10, at which point she put out the lamp and went to bed. At breakfast the following morning, Mrs. Potts said, with the serenity of a person imparting information they have been holding for a suitable moment, "Miss Hartley is a pleasant young woman." "I am sure she is," Cecily said. "The Colonel would like her settled," Mrs. Potts said. "He has been saying so since the summer." "That seems natural," Cecily said, and ate her toast. "Mrs. Potts regarded her with the frank assessment of someone who has decided the situation requires a small intervention and is calibrating its size. "His Grace," she said, "has not been to London this year." "No," Cecily said. "He has been here since July," Mrs. Potts said. "He is not usually here since July. He is usually in London from August." Cecily set down her toast. She looked at Mrs. Potts with the composure of someone who has heard a sentence and is determining exactly what it contains. "The accounts required attention," she said. "Yes," said Mrs. Potts, in the tone of a person who considers this a partial explanation at best, and rose to attend to other things. The Colonel's letter arrived on the 22nd. Cecily did not see it. She knew it had arrived because the Duke was in his study for 4 hours that afternoon without sending for correspondence, and when she brought the afternoon review at the usual time, his expression was held in the particular way it was held when he was managing something he had not yet decided about. She put the correspondence on the desk. She said, "The spring renewals are drafted." "Good," he said. "There are 3 tenants requesting modifications to their terms. I have noted the modifications and my recommendation on each." "What are your recommendations?" "Accept the first, negotiate the second, decline the third, but offer an alternative arrangement I have outlined on the second page." He looked at the relevant document. He read her notes with the thoroughness she had come to expect. "Why decline the third?" "Because Mr. Carow is requesting a rent reduction on the grounds of a poor harvest, which is legitimate, but his account shows 3 years of above-average yield that he did not raise when the harvests were good. The reduction he is requesting would bring his rent below the 1812 rate. The alternative arrangement offers him a 1-year deferral instead, which addresses his immediate difficulty without establishing a precedent that would require me to offer the same to 7 other tenants who had equally poor harvests and did not ask." The Duke read the second page. He put it down. "Accept the first," he said. "Negotiate the second. Offer Carow the alternative." "Yes," she said. She was gathering the documents when he said, without inflection, "Colonel Hartley has written." She stopped. She did not turn immediately. "He has proposed a match," the Duke said, "between his daughter and myself." Cecily turned. His expression was held. "I see," she said. "It is a reasonable proposal," he said. "Miss Hartley is—" He paused, in the manner of a man selecting a word with care. "Suitable." "She is," Cecily agreed. "She is 22, he said. "Yes." "She is pleasant company." "So I understand." He was looking at the documents on his desk. He said, "I have not yet replied." Cecily said nothing. The lamp on the desk was burning with the particular steadiness of a lamp in a room with no draught, and the light it cast on the desk and the ledgers and the Duke's hand, which was flat on the surface in the way it had been on the day she delivered the completed accounts, was very even. "The Hartley estate is in good order," she said, because the silence had reached a length that required something in it. "Yes," he said. "The Colonel is well regarded." "Yes." "Miss Hartley would manage a household of this size without difficulty." The Duke looked up at her then, with an expression she had not seen before, which was not held, and was not set, and was, she thought, the expression of a man who has been told something true that he did not want confirmed. "No doubt," he said. She took the documents and went back to the East study and sat at the table and looked at the spring renewal drafts for a period of time she did not count, and then went back to work because the spring renewals were not going to draft themselves, and the end of the year was in 6 weeks, and she had said she would stay until the end of the year, and she intended to keep to what she had said. The 28th of November. The Colonel's letter had not been answered. Cecily knew this because Mr. Fenn had come down from London again, ostensibly about the timber valuation, and had spent 40 minutes in the Duke's study, and had come to the East study afterward, with the expression of a man who has delivered a piece of advice and is not certain it was received. He sat in the chair across from Cecily and looked at the ledgers with the air of a man who is about to say something that is not about ledgers. "He is not a man who acts quickly," Mr. Fenn said. "No," Cecily agreed. "He is a man who considers things at length and then acts decisively," Mr. Fenn said. "In my experience, that seems like a reasonable approach to most things," Cecily said. Mr. Fenn looked at her with the frank assessment of someone who has been a solicitor for 35 years and has learned to read rooms. "Miss Vane," he said, "I have known the Duke since he was 17. He has been agreed with in my observation for most of the intervening years." "That seems likely," she said. "It has not, Mr. Fenn said carefully, been entirely good for him." Cecily set down her pen. She looked at Mr. Fenn with the composure of someone who has decided to receive information and not deflect it. "He lost his father when he was 19, Mr. Fenn said. "He inherited the title and the estate and the management of 3 younger siblings, and he was not prepared for any of it, and he managed it because there was no one else to manage it, and he has been managing it since, and he is very good at it, and he is, I think, very tired of doing it alone." Cecily said nothing. "The Hartley match," Mr. Fenn said, "would be a sensible arrangement." "Yes," Cecily said. "Sensible arrangements," Mr. Fenn said, rising from the chair with the economy of a man who has said what he came to say, "are not always the most accurate ones." He put on his coat. "I have told him the same thing. I thought you should know I had." He left. Cecily sat with the ledgers and the lamp and the sound of the rain, which had started again, and thought about accuracy, which was a thing she had always considered a virtue, and which was, she was finding, not always comfortable. The 4th of December. She asked him to speak plainly. It was evening, and they were in the east study, and the dinner things had been cleared, and the fire had been built up against the cold that had come in properly now, the real winter cold with weight to it, and she had brought a question about the timber valuation that was not strictly urgent, because she had wanted a reason to be in the room, and she was not proud of this, but she was not dishonest about it either. He had answered the question. They had been sitting in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that has a shape to it, when she said, "I would like you to say what you are thinking." He looked at her. "You have been not saying it for approximately 3 weeks, she said. "I would prefer you said it," he said. "I am thinking about the Hartley proposal." "I know," she said. "What are you thinking about it?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to deflect, and then he said, "I am thinking that it is a sensible arrangement." "You said that before? It is still true?" "Yes," she said. "It is true. Say the rest of it." He looked at the fire. He said, "There is no rest of it." "There is," Cecily said, with the directness of a person who has decided that the cost of plain speech is lower than the cost of continued ambiguity. "You are a man who has been agreed with for a long time. You are accustomed to arranging your life according to what is sensible and presenting the arrangement as the entirety of your thinking. You are not considering Miss Hartley. You are considering the category she belongs to, which is suitable, and you are attempting to decide whether suitable is sufficient, and you are not asking yourself that question plainly because you have not had to ask yourself plain questions for a long time." He was looking at her now. "You are also," she said more quietly, "a man who has been managing things alone since he was 19, and who is, I think, not certain what it would mean to have someone who was not simply managing alongside him, but was—" She stopped. She started again. "Someone whose opinion he actually wanted." The fire made a sound. "That is," he said after a moment, "very accurate." "I know," she said. "You do not find it—" He stopped. "You are not—" "I am not being cruel," she said. "I am being precise. There is a difference." "I know the difference," he said. "Then say the rest of it," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. The fire, the rain on the glass, the lamp on the table between them with the ledgers open under it. "I do not want to reply to Hartley's letter," he said. "No," she said. "I have been in this house since July," he said, "which I have not been since I was 19, and I have—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I have been glad of it." "Yes," she said. "That is the rest of it," he said. She looked at him with the composure of someone who has received a true thing and is holding it carefully. "Then you should not reply to Hartley's letter," she said. "No," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Not until you know what you want to say instead." He looked at her. "That is not a simple thing to determine," he said. "No," she said. But you are not a man who avoids difficult determinations. You are a man who avoids ones that require you to want something. He said after a moment, "Cecily." It was the first time. She registered it as the first time. "Yes," she said. He said, "I would like you to stay past the end of the year." "I know," she said. "That is not what I—" He stopped. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is articulate everywhere except here, which she had noted, which she had been noting for weeks, and which was, she thought, the most honest thing about him. "I am not saying it correctly." "You are not," she agreed. "I am asking—" He stopped again. He said with the plainness of a man who has run out of other approaches, "I am asking whether you would consider remaining here not as my secretary." "In what capacity?" she said. He said, "That is the least elegant sentence I have ever produced." "It is not a sentence," she said. "It is a question." "Yes." "Then ask it." He said, "Will you marry me?" It was not, she would later tell Mrs. Potts, the most romantic proposal she had heard. She had heard one more romantic proposal from a curate in Somerset who had spent 40 minutes on the subject and used the word ineffable 3 times, and she had declined him, which suggested that the romantic approach was not necessarily the more effective one. She said, "Yes." He looked at her as though he had not entirely expected this. "Immediately," she said, "before you think of a reason to phrase it differently." "I was not going to phrase it differently." "You were considering it," she said. "I could see you considering it." He said, after a moment, "The terms." "Yes," she said, "the terms." "You will continue the accounts," he said. "Naturally." "You will—" He stopped. "I do not want to tell you what you will do. I want to know what you want." She looked at him with the composure of someone who has been asked what she wants and is finding it, against all expectation, not a difficult question. "I want the East study," she said. "I want the accounts and the correspondence. I want to be consulted on the tenant matters as I have been, with the same weight given to my recommendations." She paused. "I want the botanical volume to stay on the 3rd shelf." He said, "It will stay on the 3rd shelf." "And I want," she said more quietly, "to be spoken to plainly, as you have done this evening. I want that to be the manner of it." "Yes," he said. "Then those are the terms," she said. He stood. She stood. He crossed the room to her side of the table, which was a distance of perhaps 6 feet, and he took her hand, and he held it for a moment, and then he kissed her, briefly, with the restraint of a man who is aware that Mrs. Potts is almost certainly in the corridor. "She is," Cecily said. He looked at her. "In the corridor," she said. "She has been there for approximately 20 minutes, he said. "How do you know?" "The door," she said, "is 6 inches ajar." From the corridor there was the sound of Mrs. Potts moving away with the serenity of a person whose work is complete. At breakfast the following morning, Mrs. Potts set down the toast and said, with the composure of someone imparting information they have been holding since approximately 1817, "I told Lady Ashworth, your aunt, that is, when she first engaged you, that you would do very well here." Cecily looked at her. "She agreed," Mrs. Potts said. "She said she expected you would do well everywhere, but that Thornfield in particular had need of someone precise." She poured the tea with the efficiency of a person who has said what they came to say. She was right, as she generally was. "She arranged it," Cecily said. "She suggested it," Mrs. Potts said. "There is a difference." "Is there?" "She wrote to Mr. Fenn," Mrs. Potts said. "She said the estate accounts needed attention," which was true, and that the person best suited to attend to them was you, which was also true, and she suggested that the Duke be in residence when you arrived, which he was. She sat down across from Cecily with the air of a woman who has earned her chair. "She did not arrange the rest of it. That was entirely the 2 of you." "She might have said something," Cecily said. "She might have," Mrs. Potts agreed. "But then you would both have refused out of stubbornness, and we would have been in the same position in 3 years' time with considerably more inconvenience to everyone." Cecily looked at her toast. "She was," she said, "a very precise woman." "Yes," said Mrs. Potts, "you suited each other. You suit him too, for what it is worth." "It is worth something," Cecily said. "Good," said Mrs. Potts. and went to attend to the house, Thornfield, Derbyshire, the 3rd week of October, 1821. 3 years and 3 months after Cecily Vane arrived on the Wednesday coach with one trunk and a document case worn soft at the corners. The South Orchard, which had been in a condition of managed neglect when Cecily arrived. 12 trees, 7 of them productive, the other 5 in the particular state of trees that have not been properly pruned in a decade and have responded by producing small quantities of bitter fruit in protest, had been, over the course of 3 seasons, attended to. The 5 recalcitrant trees had been cut back in the first winter, fed and trained in the second, and had produced, in the 3rd autumn, a yield that the head gardener, a man of 52, who communicated primarily in nods and in assessments of the weather, had described as decent. This was, from him, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Cecily was in the East Study with the new estate ledger, which was the 3rd she had begun since arriving at Thornfield, and which was, she considered, the best of the 3. Because she had learned from the first 2 what the Ashworth accounts required, and had designed the 3rd accordingly. The ledger was bound in dark green cloth. She had specified the cloth herself. The Duke was at the window, which was where he was when he was thinking about something he had not yet formulated into a question, and she had learned to recognize the shape of this and to leave him to it. Their daughter, Eleanor, who was 14 months old and had inherited her father's expression of held attention and her mother's habit of cataloguing everything she encountered by touching it, was on the floor between them with a wooden horse and a wooden cart, and the absolute conviction of a person who has not yet learned that some problems do not resolve if you push them hard enough. "She has found the wheel," the Duke said from the window. "She found it yesterday," Cecily said without looking up. "She is now determining whether it is a permanent feature." "It is a permanent feature. She will establish that in approximately 4 minutes." He turned from the window. He looked at Cecily at the table and at Eleanor on the floor and at the ledger open under the lamp, which was the same lamp that had been on the table since the first day, the one with the slightly bent arm that Mrs. Potts had offered to replace 3 times and that Cecily had declined to replace because it gave good light and she saw no reason to change a thing that worked. "The drainage account," he said. "It is in order." "You said last week it was not in order." "Last week it was not. This week it is." She turned a page. "I found the error. It was in the 1819 secondary ledger, Mr. Hadlow's ghost." He made the sound that was, from him, a laugh. It was not a large sound. It was the sound of a man who laughs infrequently and means it when he does, and she had first heard it in the 3rd week of November 1818, in this room, when she had described the wine account and the cellar inventory as 2 different systems measuring 2 different things, and he had laughed briefly with the surprise of a man who has not laughed in a while and has forgotten that it is available to him. She had filed it then. She had been filing things since. "The Carrow tenancy," he said, "renewed. The deferral arrangement has been settled. He has paid the 1820 arrear in full and the 1821 rent on time." She paused. "I told you he would. You told me he was a man who needed the right arrangement, not a reduction." "Yes, you were right," he said, which was a thing he said without difficulty now, which had not always been the case. Eleanor had established the permanence of the wheel and was now investigating the axle with the thoroughness of a small person who intends to understand a thing completely before moving on to the next thing. The Duke crossed the room and sat in the chair across from Cecily, the chair that had been Mr. Fenn's, and before that had been no one's in particular, and which was now, by established habit, his. He looked at the ledger. "May I?" he said. She turned it to face him. He read the drainage account with the attention he always gave to things she had done, which was the attention of a man who has learned that the details are where the information is, and turned it back. "Decent," he said. It was the word the head gardener had used about the orchard. She looked at him. "The ledger," he said, with the composure of someone who has said something deliberate and is waiting to see if it lands. "It is not decent," she said. "It is excellent." "It is," he agreed. "I was being precise." She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a person who has been given back their own word and found it carrying a different weight than it had the first time, and then she turned back to the accounts because the accounts were not finished and Eleanor had found the axle pin and was about to remove it, and the Duke rose to intercept this with the calm of a man who has learned that some problems are better addressed before they become permanent. The lamp burned steadily. The south orchard was bare and cut back and would be, in the spring, productive. The ledger lay open on the table, the third and best one, its columns exact and its corrections clearly noted in Cecily's hand, which was the hand that had been called decorative once, in a room she had never been in, by a man who had not yet met her. He had since revised his position. The orchard would be decent in the spring.